balls, motherfuckers. So drop, shawty. It's basically a Norseman, right? It's basically a Norseman. I mean, it's got the fucking Grimswell brothers are going to put a fucking hit out on me. Woo! All right. I'm back, bitches. Benchmade, ZT, Lion Steel, Mike from Collector Knives. Who else? Jeez. Kevin Cleary. You guys can relax. Put away the confetti. I'm not dead. My beautiful mug is still here, alive and kicking. I know it's been a minute. Life's been a motherfucker. It's been super fucking busy. Salud to everybody. Cheers, motherfuckers. What is this? This is, of course, Knob Creek. Single barrel, actually. A guy at my local liquor store has his own barrel. And it's fucking titties. So, cheers, motherfuckers. Such good shit. What are we drinking today? Guinness Extra Stout. Why? Because it's delicious. That's why. Sabenza 21, which is in the pocket 4 or 5 days a week. And it makes an excellent bottle opener. So, cheers again, y'all. You might want to grab your favorite beer or a 6-pack. If you can't tell by the title of the thumbnail, this is not going to be an edge retention test. This is another one of Pastor Steele, the Super Steel Steve, Captain of the HRC Police, Lieutenant of the Keystone Cops. Thank you for that one, Apostle P. Here to do another, I guess, a rant, right? That's what it calls when you sit there and bitch about something. Cheers, guys. To everybody whose knives I have that I've been fucking taking forever to get these done, thank you so much for your patience. To everybody that watches this video, thank you for spending your time. To everybody who donates even a dime to my Patreon, thank you more than you even know, man. You guys help so much with all shipping knives, and I gotta buy a new plate, all that kind of stuff, man. Thank you guys so fucking much. I'm sorry I don't have stickers. I'm not that cool, but to everybody, I just want to say thank you. I know it's been a while. To everybody who's mad at me for not putting out a video, I'm sorry. Life work is fucking insane, but I'm making a lot more money, which is a good thing. Or I will be making a lot more money. So that's how it is. Got to feed the chitlins, right? So what's the video about today? Why? Oh, I don't even know what I'm going to title this video. What is the video about? Okay. So this is what happened. My boy Tom, hosts Hang Outdoors. If you don't know his channel, go check out his channel. Got together with a knife maker. He goes by the name of Brian. His company's called Transparent Knives. He's an excellent knife maker. Does wonderful work. He's a new guy. He's been in this less than a year. They got together and decided to do a test, which I think is excellent. I think it's awesome. Brian's going to be doing some reblades for 940 soon, and this was a bunch of the 940 reblades. It was, to my understanding, that they were going to be testing different heat treat protocols with these 10 blades to find out which one worked best and gave optimal everything. That's kind of what happened. Look, Tom's my boy. We used to do a podcast together. He's a friend of mine. He does a lot of great stuff. I'm not hating on Tom. This is not a... I'm not trying to start shit with Tom. I contacted Tom about this very situation the day his last video came out and expressed my concerns. He didn't do anything. He felt he was justified. A couple other people spoke to him. He finally changed the title of his last video, and it's still, I still have an issue with it because it's misleading. I have spent, and me and the guys, Alchemy One and Kenny and Gerald and Outpost, I've spent the last fucking year basically arguing with people, that diamonds abrade slower than chalk, in essence, right? The whole HRC debate thing, right? The reason I started this channel, right, like I've said from day one, was all I wanted to do was do some testing, learn about steel, stuff, learn more than I know now, learn about steel, and share what I learned with everybody, right? So everybody in the EDC community can be more educated on steel and how it works and how blades work and what you're paying for and what you can look for. So we're all better educated, right? Because I felt like there was a big gap between what makers were doing and what customers were thinking they were doing. I want to bridge that, right? All gravy, okay? And I said the word, you know, I turned into this big old thing where I said some blades were soft, and now I had to have this whole debate with Rockwell and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, finally, through the efforts of me and my kinfolk, we've battered back the fucking retards. Because this community is full of a lot of amazing fucking people, okay? Amazing people. One of which, Mr. Nick, who recently passed away. My condolences to you and your family, Nick. Nick Maffei, if I'm saying his last name right. Cheers to you, Nick. I know, no, I don't know what happened. All I know is you're not here anymore. And you're a great dude. We had a bunch of conversations online through Insta, and it's really sad to hear that you're gone, man. You're in a better place. So cheers to Nick. Here's you, buddy. So yeah, this community is full of a lot of great people. This community is also full of a bunch of fucking dumbasses. And I feel like I have welcomed all the dumbassery, all the fuckery, and dealt with it handily with my friends, my crew, the Keystone Cops. Now that we finally got the ball rolling and we've moved past the fact that, yes, harder steels cut longer than softer steels, given everything else being the same, when he came up with this video, there was an issue for me. I watched the entire video twice, all hour and 20 minutes of it, twice. Okay, so I make sure I wasn't missing anything. The original title of the video was HRC Doesn't Matter, ... kinda. I had an issue with that title after I saw the video twice. Tom explained to me that he wanted to keep it that way. Some other friends of mine saw it and also told him they felt the same way. He then changed the title of the video to Microstructure Matters. I'm going to explain to you a few things. Okay, the reason I'm doing this video is, one, I need to tell you what this video is actually about, why both of those titles are misleading and false, what the testing actually did show and what it didn't show, and then I want to go over some basic terminology that I want everybody to hear and listen and understand and talk about in just fucking layman terms so we all can understand what these makers are talking about. Because whenever these makers seem to get on videos, they like to blurt out a bunch of terminology and not explain any of it. Okay? And if you're not going to sit there and go and read a bunch of shit, you're not really going to get it. Okay? So, the reason why he said that the video's first title, HRC Doesn't Matter. Kinda. And then he changed it to Microstructure Matters. Both of those titles are misleading because the testing shows neither. Yes, what they did is they took 10 knives, they took 10 blades. Mr. Transparent Knives made 10 different blades, right? All that would fit a 940, Benchmade 940, all kind of worn and cliffy. And then he did 10 different heat treat protocols on them. He then sent them off to Tom, and Tom did cut tests with all of them. The testing that Tom just did with those blades was literally no different than the testing that I do every single time. You don't ever hear me talking about my test saying about HRC. I don't title my videos HRC Matters. I don't talk about microstructure because A, I don't snap the blades in half and I don't have a metallurgical microscope. The reason when I do my testing is for everyday guys. I take a brand of knife, maybe it's a Spyderco in 204P, and then I cut with it. And I do it a few times and we see how much it cuts. And then the idea is that over time, the more blades I cut with, the more brands I do, we'll start to get a scope of what companies are getting better edge retention with what steels, right? I don't know their heat treat process. I'm not privy to that. None of us are. Okay? We can now find the Rockwell, thanks to Kurt with his own Rockwell tester, and we can find out what the HRC is. So then we know what the edge angle is. I'm cutting cardboard, and we know the Rockwell, right? So based on those three things, we can determine on the cut test results and the Rockwell if the knives are done well, right? If they're heat treated well, okay? That's what I do in my testing. Tom did literally the same thing. It had nothing to do with Rockwell. It had nothing to do with microstructure. All it had to do with was 10 different heat treats. Why did it have nothing to do with Rockwell, Steve? Why? I'll tell you why. Because all the Rockwells were different. And because all the heat treats were different. The protocols were different. If we were trying to isolate whether or not Rockwell affected edge retention performance, you would want to isolate three things. What you're cutting, the edge angle, and the heat treat protocol. You'd want to control all three of those. All three of those be consistent. Those are controlled variables through all the testing. And then what you would do is do each steel to a different Rockwell. 58, 59, you temper them all. You'd heat treat them and temper them. Same process, You temper them down, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62. And in which case you would see a linear line of increasing edge retention. That's not what happened here. They had 10 different heat treat protocols for 10 different knives at like 8 different Rockwells. So the only constants in his test were material cut, which is cardboard, and edge angle, which are the same 2 things I control in my testing. Okay, the reason the Rockwell is not a factor in this is because the heat treat protocols are not the same. A heat treat protocol is basically the steps, the recipe, the steps you take to heat treat steel. Okay, by changing variables in that, okay, how long it's in the heat, how short it's in the heat, how you're quenching it, how fast, how quick, cryo, how many tempers, how many cryos. By varying these things, you get very different results on the steel. And I'll explain that in a little bit, okay? The reason why microstructure matters is a shit title for that video is because we don't know the microstructure. We have a bunch of knives. We have 10 knives with the same edge angle, cutting the same stuff, with 10 different heat treats. Some do better than others. In that test, I believe it's blades 3 and 4 are the only instance where we can draw that conclusion because it was 2 knives with the same edge angle and the same material they're cutting at the same Rockwell. Both were 64.5. So we can determine nothing about microstructure. What we can determine is one heat treat was better than the other because one cut drastically more than the other. We can assume it was the microstructure, but for whatever reason, do it be costs or whatever? Well, the blades are all already paid for. We know that through Patreon and donations. So why we didn't have the blades, we didn't snap the blades in half and take a picture with the USB microscope and look at the grain and then determine which one's chunkier and coarser than the other, I don't know. But we can't make any, all we can do is assume it was the microstructure because the heat treat protocol was different. So all this test showed was Brian from Transparent Knives, 10 different heat treat protocols. So when you hit up Brian for a reblade, you can say, I want protocol number 3 or number 4 or number 9. That's all it shows you. This would be exact. This would make just as it would make no sense to say anything about Rockwell if let's say all the heat treat protocols were the same, right? The Rockwells were all the same, and then the edge angles changed. You changed it from 30 degrees inclusive down to 5 degrees inclusive, and then you said HRC matters, kinda, because the blade at 58 HRC is definitely at. Or I'm sorry, if the blade at 58 HRC is at 10 degrees inclusive and the blade at 65 HRC is at 50 degrees inclusive, they're probably not going to cut all that different. But then you look at it, if you looked at it and said, well, it's not on a linear path, which is what Tom said, you don't see a linear path even though the HRC is rising, that's bullshit because the edge angle changed. The only way to figure out if to isolate any of those things is to isolate them. So if you wanted to see Rockwell changing, right, how Rockwell affected HRC, you'd have, by the way, all the blades were the same steel, all 204P. What you would do is have the same blade steel, all with the same heat treat protocol, simply tempered to different HRCs, and then all the edge angles the same and all the cutting material the same. Then you could go, okay, look, as we go up in HRC, it does or it doesn't get better edge retention. But if you change any one of those variables, then there's no control. Then you can't extrapolate anything. All I can tell you is that with, and because Brian didn't disclose any of his heat treat information, we don't know what the difference is. All we know is some of them got soaked longer. That's it. Do you guys even know what a soak is? Do you even know what the fuck he's talking about? No, because he didn't go in to explain it. Now, I want to give the guys credit. They took a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of themselves to do this test. I'm not knocking them. My issue is it's misleading. I don't want people, I already see comments in his comment section saying, hey, Tom, thanks for the apples to apples comparison on Rockwell. It's bullshit. It has nothing to do with Rockwell. The heat treat protocols are completely different. Some were shitty, some were better. You don't know whether it's the Rockwell or the heat treat protocol giving it the boost or the lagging in performance. Again, just like if you had all those the same and you changed the edge angle, you wouldn't be able to tell if it was the edge angle affecting edge retention or the Rockwell. If you change the other two, you have to keep all those the same. I keep slapping my knees like I'm playing patty cakes over here. Okay, that's my issue with the test. Okay, and I want everyone to understand that this test is simply, it's not about Rockwell, it's not about microstructure. We have no idea, we haven't even broken the knives open and seen it. okay? I really wish Tom, if he had gone as far as he'd gone, would have taken the extra time. Instead of bragging about that he cut 3,500 feet and his wrist hurt, he would have snapped the blades in half and looked at him and taken a couple pictures, and then we could have looked at it. It still wouldn't have meant shit about Rockwell, but at least we could have determined that the microstructure was different, that some had finer grains and some were coarser and whatever. There were cracks or whatever happened in the steel. One was overheated, one wasn't. Okay? So that's what I wanted to get across. There was a lot, when I watched the video twice, mind you, there's a lot of double talk, okay? One of the things that I said, Tom sits there and says, in the real world, if HRC affected edge retention, you'd expect to see a linear graph, but we don't see that, which is false because the heat treats are different. And then Brian talks about how microstructure tends to come more into play after 62 Rockwell. That's also horseshit. Okay, the microstructure of, if you take the same shit heat treat protocol he did on knife 3 and applied it to knife 1 at 58 or whatever it was, okay, and then harden that to 58 and then 60, you get a decrease in edge retention because the protocol's shitty. Okay, there was just a lot of double talk, a lot of mention of blade forms. That's another thing. Fuck blade forms. Blade forms is a fucking echo chamber of a bunch of fucking cock-sucking, ear-biting, window-licking mouth breathers is what it is. A bunch of guys that sound off and stroke each other's dick because they all think they know how to sharpen and know everything about steel. Even though none of them, bar a few, even put up any sort of content at all. They all are just know-it-alls. That's all it is. I hate blade forms. Okay? So the fact that Brian references blade forms so much drives me up a fucking wall. Brian's a very intelligent young guy. Okay? He's very young in his knife-making career, and I think he'd have a lot better success talking to, or at least referencing, actual experienced knife makers as opposed to telling people he's asking people questions on blade forms. Okay? That's just me. Okay? So yeah, again, I'm not hating on Tom, but this needs to be discussed. You could draw nothing from Rockwell and draw nothing from microstructure or anything on that. All you saw was Brian's 10 heat treats. Okay? I'm trying to think. There was a lot of things that were said in the video that just didn't... The microstructure of the steel is important at any Rockwell. It doesn't matter, okay? Just as, if not more important, at lower Rockwells or not. No, it's the same. It really is. It matters, period. It absolutely matters, period. Okay? When you see I get a custom knife from like Roman over at K-Knives, right, in 4V, and it outcuts Spyderco's by like, a metric, 100 fucking feet or whatever it is, that's heat treat. Okay, that's him taking the time to get that microstructure dialed in, right? To get the grains where they need to be, get them really fine, get the carbides distributed, keep them small, going through all that time, making sure there's no retained austenite, making sure he's going through tempering processes and cryos. That's the difference, okay? Microstructure always matters. And this is a topic I'm going to get into, a lot of us are going to get into later on, or at least soon, okay? Now that we've gotten rid of the HRC debate. Getting parched, all this yelling. Now, some terms. There we go. That's all I want to talk about. Now that we're 18 minutes in. You keep hearing microstructure, austenite, marsenite, blah, blah, cryo, this and the third. What the fuck does it all mean? Let's talk about what it means, okay? When someone says they're talking about the microstructure of the steel, they're talking about just that, the tiny structure of the steel. When you look at a blade, right, it's a solid piece of metal. If you look at it under a microscope, it's made up of, obviously, atoms and tiny molecules, okay? Little molecules that are put together. And of those molecules, you have the grain of the actual steel, which is just ferrite, which is iron and carbon. And then you have, if you have alloying elements like vanadium or molybdenum, you get carbides, okay? What is a heat treat protocol? Heat treat protocol, like I said before, is simply the process of heat treating steel, okay? A lot of the steels that we see are marseninic steels, okay? And what that means is they are... you have marseninic and austenitic steels. Some are stainless and have more nickel in them, and some marseninic are not, basically. Okay, that's not really important. That's the process of heat treating. It's just simply the steps you follow to take a soft steel and make it a hard steel with the desired effect. Okay, be it carbide formation, whatever. Okay. In the video, Tom says, "Oh well, Roman and Triple B talk a lot about they want fine grain structure." Okay. What is fine grain structure? What does that mean? What is grain structure? Grain structure is this. Grain structure is exactly what you think it is. If you look at the steel under a microscope, if you look at Laren at Knife Steel Nerds, he has pictures of this. And it's quite literally, you see all the little grains and carbides in the steel. Okay? we want fine grain structure, okay? Before we get into that, I'm going to do a little demo here, and I'm going to show you guys this. What's another term? Austenite. He talked about retained austenite. What is austenite? When you get a piece of steel, right? Let's say just some, some 1085, right? You get steel, okay? It's soft. It comes annealed, which means it's soft, okay? Hasn't been heat treated yet, okay? So you have a piece of steel, and what you're doing in the heat treat process is, this is full of austenite. Austenite is tough and gummy and malleable, soft, right? Austenite is the molecule that is formed when steel is made and forged, okay? You take iron and you take carbon, and when you combine them, you get steel, okay? Austenite is a compound that's formed all through there. And again, I'm not going into crazy detail because nobody cares about the crazy detail. I just want everyone to understand these terms, so when you see someone talking about it, you understand it, okay? You want to geek out hard, hit me up on DM me on Instagram, okay? What you're trying to do, now it's soft and it's malleable, and it's very tough, okay? That's not what we want in a knife blade. We want a hardened blade. So what you do when you are austenitizing, what austenitizing is taking whatever particular steel you're talking about and bringing it to a temperature, okay, where the formation of marsenite can occur. And that's different for every steel, right? But a basic carbon steel, I think it's like 1475 degrees, right? Somewhere that 1425 or 1475, okay? Once you bring it to that temperature, right, everything starts moving, okay? You got to think of steel a lot like, kind of like water, right? So when you have water, right, and you add heat, you add energy to it, right, it starts moving. The molecules start moving and moving around, and then it starts turning into steam. It boils and turns into steam, okay? So when you apply energy, heat, the steel, it starts to do something very similar to that, okay? So what you're trying to do is form marsenite. Marsenite's good, it's hard. So what you're going to do is you raise this to its big temperature, whatever causes that reaction, and then you quench it. What is quenching? Quenching is just the rapid cooling of steel from hot to cold. That's all it is, okay? So whether it's something like this where you're going to go in oil, a PM steel, a lot of those are plate quenched, which means they're simply air quenched. You put them between two plates and let it cool down that fast. And what happens is through that chemical reaction of going really hot, 1475 degrees, and dropping to 200 degrees in a matter of a second, all those little molecules of austenite turn into marsenite, and they bond up, and you get a grain, okay? You get a grain. You get a hardened steel, okay? Why, God, what was I going to say? Okay, that's what happens. Then you temper, okay? What is tempering? Tempering is the relaxing of a steel through a temperature that's lower than what you austenized it at, okay? What you heat it up to. So what you're going to do is you're going to bring it back up. Could be anywhere from 300 degrees to 1,000 degrees, depending on the steel, or higher. I don't know what maximum and all that is, okay? And what you're doing is relaxing the steel. Once this thing comes out of the quench, heat it up, drop it, okay? The steel is very hard. Something like 1084 will be 65 Rockwell. Very hard stuff, but it's also under a lot of stress from all that, okay? It's very tight, okay? Tempering is like, if you guys ever cook steak, you guys watch the fucking Food Network, right? And they sit there and they talk about letting your steak rest, right? Same concept. You sear the steak, it's a muscle, it tightens up, okay? Tightens up. Then you let it rest. Why? Because it's a muscle and it starts to go like this. If you cut it while it's tight like this, what happens? All the good juices go flying out on your cutting board and you end up with dry steak. With steel, it's all tightened up because it just went from a dramatic chemical reaction, okay? What you're doing tempering is then putting it back and putting it under heat, not enough to cause more, not enough to re-quench it, but enough that it starts to relax the steel. What tempering also does is some of that austenite that might be still in there, right, depending on how you did this, when you quench, it goes from, not all of it goes from austenite to marsenite. There's some left in there a lot of times, okay? When you temper it, some of that, because it's going cold and then back hot again, some of that austenite will then turn into marsenite. So tempering is a way of relaxing the steel. You can temper a steel that comes out of a quench at 65 to 65. Again, you can keep it there, or you can drop it slowly, okay? You can drop it down as soft as you want. Generally, the higher the tempering temperature, the lower the Rockwell, the more it softens, okay? A heat treat protocol, the reason I'm saying this, the heat treat protocol is the steps you follow. What the austenizing temperature is, okay? What the quenching is, what the tempering temperature is, not the temperature, sorry, the tempering, or how many tempers you do, okay? Because doing 1 temper or 3 tempers can have a drastic effect on the steel, okay? For instance, the blades that I tested, these right here. I wanted, here we go, Tom's test, my test. When I wanted to isolate Rockwell, I got the same exact steel. This is from actually the same fucking bar of steel, okay? I took the exact same steel from the exact same bar, okay? I did the exact same heat treat process, okay? First, I'm sorry, I normalized both these exactly the same way. Normalizing is when you take a steel, okay? And not to be confused with annealing, is when you heat it up, right? To a certain point, usually above magnetic, or right when it stops being magnetic. Once steel gets to a certain temperature, I think it's 1425 degrees, it loses its magnetism, okay? Once it does that, and then you let it cool, it's still air. And it cools down fairly quickly, right? And what that does is that makes all the grains from when they're rolling this shit out and they're forging it and it's all fucked up inside there, it evens everything out. It's like letting dough rest. Okay, like if you ever make bread, right? And you get the yeast, you have to let the dough sit first, right? Before you shape it and then let it proof again. You need the dough to relax. Everything's tight. All the gluten's tightened up. All the fucking celiac guys are gonna freak out. All the gluten's all tight. Everything's tight, right? If you ever worked at a pizza joint, okay, you make dough and use it the same day. You gotta let it sit for 2 days. Why? Because it's gotta relax. Same with the steel. When you normalize, you're relaxing it first, right? So everything's more even keel before you drop it in that fucking hot ass furnace, okay? But in my test, same bar stock, same steel. Normalized them exactly the same. My heat treat was exactly the same, as in both of these steels were brought to the same exact, or as close as I could, to the same austenizing temperature. Both were quenched in exactly the same oil at exactly the same temperature. Both had the exact amount of tempers and the exact same amount of cryos. Well, it wasn't liquid nitrogen, it's technically deep freeze, but we'll say cryo, okay? The only difference being the softer one was tempered 3 times at 450 degrees, and the harder one was tempered at 3 times at 325 degrees. That's how I got one softer one, but the heat treat process was exactly the same. So then I sharpened them to the exact same edge angle, okay? I sharpened them the same bevels, same edge angle, and cut the same stuff with the same finish. I've isolated Rockwell. That's how you do it. If I would have done this one and austenized it at 1600 degrees and austenized this one at 1425 and then gave this one 2 tempers and this one 4 tempers and this one cryo and this not, I'm not showing you shit about Rockwell. I'm not, even though they could be, and if they're different Rockwells, right, you're not going to know shit. All you're going to know is they're 2 different heat treats. If they came to the same Rockwell, then we can turn around and if one cuts more than the other, break this one open and look at it and go, wow, look, this one's a lot finer than this one and this one's all chunky. Only if you isolate everything. I literally wrote the blueprint on how to do this. Myself. I made my own knives just for this testing. That's how you isolate Rockwell. Okay? That's how you isolate microstructure. Okay, so where was I? Austenite, marstenite. So that's what you do. Okay? You're then, and like I said, with the tempering. So the tempering is just going to bring it down. Okay? Or keep it the same. But you're relaxing the steel. That's your basic heat treat. Cryo. What is cryo? Well, you have deep freeze and you have actually cryo. Anything cryogenic is liquid nitrogen. Deep freeze would be like using dry ice. Dry ice and like isopropyl alcohol. Okay? It goes down to about negative 100 degrees, whereas liquid nitrogen is like 2 something. Okay? Why would you do that? Well, just like when you take steel from really hot and you drop it into 140 degree oil and it cools really quickly and all the austenite starts converting into marstenite very quickly. If you then take it from 200 degrees and throw it in that liquid nitrogen, or you throw it in a deep freeze and you drop it again a second step, much the same thing happens. You push out even more. More of that austenite gets turned into marstenite. Okay, so the whole point is, I'll explain it in a little bit why we're trying to get rid of austenite, but the idea is you don't want any austenite usually in a knife. Okay, you want the knife to be as hard and as strong as you want it. Even if the knife's going to be softer, like at 58 HRC, you don't want austenite because it's just not favorable for a knife blade, okay, for sharpening reasons, edge holding, and stuff like that. If you take 2 knives with the same heat treat, well, not really the same heat treat, you take 2 knives and they're both 58 HRC, and one of them you did a triple temper and a triple cryo, and one of them you didn't, the one with the triple temper, triple cryo is going to cut more, and it's going to sharpen a lot easier. It's going to take a better edge because there's going to be less retained austenite in that steel, more than likely, okay, and that affects edge retention stuff. We'll get into that later. So, those are some basic terms. That's why that's what happens when somebody's doing. So when he says my austenizing temp, the soak. When some knife maker says the soak, all the soak is simply just kind of like it sounds. How many minutes the steel was sitting in the fire. That's it. Past its austenizing temp. Or at its austenizing temp. So once it heats, when you have a really nice fancy oven, and that blade in there hits 1475 degrees, you're going to leave it in there for 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, could be anything. The recommendations for steels are all different, and all makers play around with this. You should be, at least, because that's how you find what works best, okay? Why is the soak important? He mentions this in the video that two of the steels that perform shitty had 3 times longer soak times. Why is that important? Okay, like I said, you want to think about steel kind of like water, okay? The grains in the steel, once you apply energy, heat to them, are going to move around, okay? And they're going to expand, right? Like water expands in steam, the molecules expand, and they're going to sink together, okay? Just like molecules of water in the sky condense and fall down as rain. Actually, it's called precipitation in steel as well. Same concept, okay? That's what precipitation is. When things form and leak out. A cloud precipitates. The water molecules form and they drip out, okay? Why is that important in steel, okay? You got to think of steel once it heats up like... it's a good analogy. Okay. If you ever saw your window when it's raining and you see the droplets of water, and you'll see one droplet, a bigger droplet, start slowing down, and it'll pull little droplets into it, and it'll get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Due to the surface tension. That's exactly what happens when steel gets hot. The grains start to grow, right? The little grains that make up the steel start to grow, and bigger ones that are naturally bigger, or other ones next to each other, will start to clump together. Carbides will do the same thing. They'll start to clump together, okay? So the longer now obviously, just like with water, the longer you heat it, the more steam you get. The more agitated it gets. The longer you heat steel, the more you're going to get large grains. Okay? The more things are going to start morphing together, and they're going to become not homogeneous like you think. I always say homogeneous steel. No. Homogeneous is, when I say homogeneous, I mean even. Okay? Not technically homogenized like things are blended. Well, yeah, I guess so. That makes sense. Blended. You don't want big, chunky pieces of iron, ferrite, cementite, basically, or carbide in your steel. And I'm about to show you why. I'm going to do an example now that we're 32 minutes in. If you've made it this long, fucking cheers to you, motherfuckers. So those are the basic terms of heat treating, right? It's simple as it can be. And it really is that simple. You don't need to worry about fucking carbides, or how many fucking... A lot of that shit's theoretical, man. The world of metallurgy is not super explored, right? And that's why if you really want to learn and geek out about this, you go to Laren's website. He's literally a metallurgist, and he geeks out about stuff like this. A lot of it's theory, a lot of it's in practice, but, that's why I don't go into that kind of stuff, because it's just, it's fun to me, you know what I mean? But for normal people, no one gives a shit, okay? You want to know, that's how you know what steel is. So when you hear a maker talking about changing an austenizing temp, changing his... quench rate, right? Quench rate is how fast he quenches it, right? So if it's a plate quench or an air quenching steel, he might do one blade where he takes it out and he just, like Greg Medford, takes it out and they put it on a table and they let it cool. But he might change that. The next time he might take it out, slam it between 2 plates and blow compressed air into it. That's going to cool it a lot faster. So you're going to have 2 different results. It's going to affect the way the steel cools down. It affects how much austenite is left in the steel. So... I'm about to pause this motherfucker right now, and I'm going to show you guys an example real quick of why we want fine grain in steel, and when it's applicable and when it's not, which is basically never. So watch this real quick. All right, motherfuckers, grain structure. That's what we're going to talk about right here, okay? Let's make sure we get all this so you can see it all. All right, real simple. Why do we want fine grain structure, right? As opposed to why do we not want coarse grain? Well, for every reason you can imagine. And here's why. Okay. Imagine you're looking at your steel under a microscope, right? Here's a really accurate interpretation. Big, huge grains, finer, tiny grains, right? Now, let's talk about edge stability first, right? Because that's going to tie into everything, okay? I'm going to take my finger, okay? This is going to be a piece of wire, okay? This is the edge of the knife right here, okay? You guys see? So one finger, right? I'm going to go up and I'm going to pull. That's the size chip that piece of wire leaves. This big old grain comes falling out. Same finger.
Thank you.
There you go. Now, that's how much grain comes out. See the difference in the fucking size between these? Okay, so when you have something that's finer grained, right, more tightly compact, smaller grains, when, let's say, for instance, on this with edge stability, you take a chip out of it, you're going to have smaller, I've used a Lego example before, you're going to get smaller chips are going to come out of that edge. Whereas if you have big clumpy ones like this, like with big clumpy carbides or big clumpy grain, aka D2, you're going to get a much bigger chunk with the same effect. A bigger piece of the steel is going to come out and rip out together as opposed to a finer grain. Now, why is this important? Why is this important in edge retention? Well, the same reason for this. When we're talking about edge retention, right, we're talking about how long the blade, how the edge is going to hold itself, right? It's going to hold its apex, and then how it's going to break down, right? So how does an edge break down? Well, what a lot of people don't realize is when you're cutting, right, especially with your human hand, this is one of the reasons Katra, a lot of guys, you know, is bullshit, well, for many reasons, but when you're cutting into something, okay, it's not, you're not just going in a perfectly straight motion like this, right? Well, this is dull because I'm sharpening it. But for instance, okay, here we go. Thanks, BJ. Right, and you're cutting into something, right? Let's say this is a piece of cardboard. There's tiny movements lateral like this in your hand as you're cutting. You don't feel it, but it's happening, especially with something thicker like cardboard. Those little movements like this translate into wiggle on the edge of the blade like this. Those tiny wiggles put lateral stress on this blade, okay? Is the thing focusing? There we go. Puts lateral stress side to side, okay? And that's really where the edge starts to break down. If you have a soft edge, right, soft steel, it's going to roll. That's why the edge rolls side to side, okay? If you have a harder steel and a well heat-treated steel, it's going to chip. You have tiny, tiny, tiny little chips, right? Now, if you can imagine the same exact analogy right here, okay? Sharpness, right? So let's say your measure of sharpness is how long it's going to cut printer paper, right? So sharpness is the width of the apex, right? So the smaller the actual width of the apex, right, the sharper it's going to be, okay? And as the knife gets duller as it widens, right? So as you have you have an edge like this, as it starts to degrade and the edge starts to lose itself, right? The apex gets wider and wider and wider down that triangle, right? This is the reason why edge angles make a big deal. So if you have something that's 50 degrees inclusive, right, versus something that's 10 degrees inclusive, something that's 10 degrees inclusive is going to take a lot longer to hit the same width of steel as something that's 50 degrees inclusive, right? So you imagine the same thing that goes with the grain. So with smaller grain, it's going to take longer for the apex to widen. So it's going to take longer for it to dull. That's why I said before, if you take the same steel, the same Rockwell, and you give one a big chunky structure like this and one a fine one, that's when you're looking at the microstructure. That's when you're going to see this grain come into play. Like on Tom's third and fourth blade, same Rockwell, right? Same edge angle, same things being cut, but drastically different results, like 200-foot difference. Reason being is because the shittier knife probably had grain like this, okay? So what happens is as this edge is going through material and those little tiny lateral movements and the edge is moving away, bigger chunks are coming out. So the bigger the chunks that come out, the quicker that apex widens and the duller the knife gets, okay? Why is this good for, let's talk about types of toughness, right? Okay, so for instance, something that's going to be tighter. Okay, so toughness, right? Well, when people talk about toughness, they're really talking about edge stability. Toughness is plastic deformation, right? Okay, so when you take, I don't want to bend Vern. Okay, here we go. This, okay, if I take it and I bend it, it's plastically deformed. It stayed that way, okay? This is tough. If I take this blade right here and I go like this, you can't see it, and I can barely see it, but this blade is flexing. Why? Because this blade is stronger than this paper. That's elastic strength. It's moving and then going back to true because this blade is stronger. Tin foil is super tough. I can bend it in half. It stays that way, but it's not very strong, right? So we want strength, okay? We don't want toughness. A lot of people talk, I've said this a million times, people talk about toughness. They're really thinking about edge stability. But let's say we're talking about impact toughness, right? If I sit here and I take a piece of metal and I whack the back of this blade, right? I hit this blade like that. How much resistance this has to cracking when I hit it with something, okay? Just like if you took, let me see, like a mattress. If you have a mattress, right? Sorry, my girl's over there gaming. if you have a mattress, right? When you have a mattress that you lay down on, it's not 4 big ass coils, right? It's multiple tiny coils, because those tiny coils distribute the pressure more evenly, right? That's why you can be on one side of the bed, get up, and your girl doesn't wake up, right? Because it's diverting the pressure through many small coils. Same concept with a small grain structure. When you sit there and you have tiny little grains like this and you hit this, right, with some sort of impact, you have more tiny grains and tinier cracks, tinier boundaries between the grains that are going to allow it to absorb the shock better. This is why stuff like 1095 or 5200 has such good shock resistance and such good impact resistance, because there's very little alloying elements. So if you heat treat them well, you get a very fine grain and you get a very evenly distributed steel. So it absorbs shock a lot better than something like, if you have 204P, for instance. This has a high carbide volume, like 25%. So inherently, the grain's going to be the microstructure of the steel is going to have more carbides in it. What are carbides? Well, carbides are just like this. Boom. Big old piece of hard shit that's sitting in the middle of the steel. Now, if this is towards the edge of the knife, right, this is going to help you with edge retention. You're going to be rubbing up whatever you're cutting against this hard-ass piece of carbide versus this softer steel. That's a benefit, especially if you have lots of them. When they're all through the steel, they're not just at the edge. So when they're sitting here, right? Imagine you have this big old rock right here, right? And this big old rock is sitting right here at the spine of the blade, and I hit this with an impact. Well, this is a lot harder than the steel around it. And you got these big chunkies, so these things are going to let this thing go, boom. And you're going to get a big-ass fucking chunk taken out. So this is why we want finer grain. This is why everybody's talking. So whether it's impact toughness, whether it's toughness, whether it's strength, again, strength, smaller grains together, right, are going to be able to distribute the force more evenly, right? And it's smaller, it's going to break it up. Like I said, just like coils on a mattress. For impact, for edge stability. What is edge stability? Edge stability is resistance to chipping or cracking at the apex, right? So if you have a steel that has more fine grains, right, when that lateral stress goes side to side, it's going to give. And when it does pop out, just like with edge retention, you're going to have smaller chips as opposed to larger ones. I'm hunched over doing this fucking thing the whole fucking time. So here's my little demonstration so you guys see. This is the reason you want fine grain in steel for every application, whether it's toughness, strength, ductility, edge retention, edge stability. No matter how you cut it, smaller grain, this is what we're shooting for. Smaller grain is going to give you a better knife. All right. All right. Do my best, Matthew McConaughey. Okay, so hopefully my little paper demonstration gave y'all an idea of why makers talk about a fine grain structure and why they try to shoot for that. It's just better on all fronts, whether it's edge retention, whether it's toughness, whether it's impact resistance. Finer grain makes a better blade. So yeah, so just to wrap it up, man, and just to clarify, because I got off on a little bit of a tangent, what I'm saying about Tom and Brian's video, I'm not trying to shoot it down. And what I mean by it doesn't say anything about Rockwell. Maybe I should have phrased it better. What I mean is it didn't isolate Rockwell to demonstrate edge retention, and it didn't isolate grain structure or heat treat protocol to demonstrate edge retention. That's what I mean. So if you wanted to, like I said before, if you wanted to see Rockwell's effect on edge retention, then you would take the same steel, again, like I did in mine. You would take the same steel, right? You'd grind them the same, you'd give them the same heat treat protocol, and you would simply temper them to softer to harder, right? And then keep your edge angle and your finish the same, and you'd cut the same material. If you wanted to isolate, because he told me, oh, well, we're also trying to demonstrate grain structure. Well, if you wanted to isolate heat treat protocol, then you would want to keep all the Rockwells the same, as well as the edge geometry and what you're cutting. And then you do 10 different heat treat protocols, but you'd hit them all, you'd temper them all to 60 Rockwell. And then you'd cut them with the same edge angle. And then that would that would demonstrate what heat treat protocol and then affects edge retention. If you wanted to isolate Rockwell, you'd keep all the heat treat protocols the same and you'd change the Rockwell. And then you would see, okay, this is how Rockwell affects edge retention. And if you wanted to test how, which I'll be doing soon, if you wanted to test how Edge geometry, edge angles affect edge retention. You'd keep the heat treat protocol the same. You'd keep the Rockwell the same. And then you just adjust the sharpening angle, right? Imagine if I did a test where I had 10 blades made for me with the same heat treat protocol and different Rockwells, and then kept the edge angles different, and then changed all the edge angles. You wouldn't know whether it was the Rockwell or the edge angle affecting the results. So that's what I mean by their test. Because they had the heat treat protocol as well as the Rockwell, both of those changed, you can't really attribute one or the other. Only on that one sample. Those two blades. I think it was blade 3 and 4, or 3 and 9 or something like that. He had two that were both at 65.5 HR, 64.5 Rockwell, and one cut 430 feet and one cut like 280 or something like that. That's the only instance in that test where you can directly point to the heat treat being the issue, because the Rockwell was the same and the sharpening angle was the same. So again, guys, I just wanted to clarify that. I know I got off on a tangent, and I was like, and I said, it's not demonstrating Rockwell, it's not demonstrating heat treat, and that's the reason why. Is because they didn't isolate one or the other. You can't have varying heat treats and varying Rockwells and then draw a conclusion about either one of those relative to the group. You get what I'm saying? Relative to that, you can't do it. Just like what I do. You know what I mean? That's why I talk about Rockwell and I talk about edge angle. I talk about heat treat. Okay, but I'm doing it from different makers. Again, that's the whole point of this, is to take different makers and see whose blades are cutting the best with this, when I can control the edge geometry and what I'm cutting and the edge finish. If I was going to go out, which I did, and take the time to make knives to isolate one of them, I would isolate that one. So again, it was a cool test. I'm glad they did it. I hope he turns around. I hope he breaks those knives in half. And he takes that USB microscope and looks at them and then definitively says, okay, look at the grain on this steel. Look how blown up it is. Look at how fine this one is. And this one outcut this one. And then we can draw the conclusion. But, sorry, I'm feeling a bit sick. But the fact, like I said, that's my biggest issue with the test. Because they didn't isolate one or the other, we really don't know if the results are because of an HR, other than those two blades. You can't really say any one of those other steels did better or worse, because you don't know whether it's the Rockwell affecting it or whether it's the heat treat protocol affecting it, because both of those were adjusted. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say. My hat's off to them. Like I said, I hope they go back and they snap those blades and take some pictures. Then we can really identify, give more credence to it. I didn't want this video going out, and I already saw people saying that it was an apples comparison to Rockwell. It is not. It is just relative decisive. It's not demonstrating how Rockwell affects edge retention, and it's not demonstrating how grain structure is affecting edge retention, because we haven't seen the grain structure, and none of them have the same. The other variables aren't controlled. Okay, so there we go. I'm not talking shit. I just had to clarify that. I had to get it out there. As the captain, I gotta patrol the streets and make sure everybody's following the law. You know what I mean, for the lay of the land. So. Cheers, everybody. Thank y'all for listening to my fucking 40-minute goddamn rant. Hopefully that little paper exercise made it a little more simple for everybody to understand. So when you hear a maker like Triple B, or you hear, Brian from Transparent Knives start talking about soak times and, austenizing temps and yada, 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 everyone will understand, and have a better grasp of what he's talking about. So it makes more sense to everybody. So you can all look at the data and understand what they're seeing. You know what I mean? I come from a world, the kitchen world, where the old school chefs love to keep their recipes really close to the chest. You know what I mean? And it doesn't do anything but hinder progress, is all it does. I'll be the first one to give a recipe to anybody. Me being a great chef and me running good restaurants and me being successful has nothing to do with just recipes. It's experience, it's technique, it's me, it's everything that I've developed over the last 15 years of my life. I can give someone I can give them my exact recipe to a scallop dish that I make. That's cool. They might be able to make. Guess what? I'll make a new one. I'll make one even better. You know what I mean? So it's not. I understand that world of knife makers, because it is very similar to cooking, and guys like to play stuff close to the chest. So I'm going to go out there and explain this to everybody. And a lot of makers don't like talking because, like I said, there's a lot of great people in this community. There's a lot of fucking fuckwits, specifically on blade forums. They love to talk shit, and guys get frustrated and they say, fuck it, don't talk about it. So here's my fucking loud ass out here, and I'll sit here, and I know these, which is funny, because you guys would be astounded at how many custom knife makers and high-end production knife makers that I've spoken to, that I've met and have reached out to me, and who actually really dig my videos for this, really for the simple fact that I just explain stuff so everybody can learn. Because most makers out there want people to appreciate what they're putting their hard work into, right? They want people to appreciate the heat treat. They want people to appreciate the blade. They don't want people just to pick up a knife and think it's cool, you know, because it does this and it drops shut, you know what I mean? They want to appreciate that, but just like anybody, I would love, you know, I try to educate my servers so they can educate the guest. I want you to know that if I'm serving barrel fish, where this fish came from, and maybe, you know, and how it was caught, and where, you know, and it'll give you more of the experience, and you can appreciate where this thing came from just as much as I can, and you're not just eating and thinking that it's a fat piece of tilapia. You know what I mean? So there we go. No hate or nothing like that. Just had to put this out there and clarify that, and then hopefully this helped everybody. Thank y'all for fucking watching. I appreciate it. I'm gonna get that 204P test done. I'm gonna do a live edge retention test. That's gonna be a lot of fun. Hope y'all have a great fucking night. Cheers. And I'll see y'all in the next one.